Hello, I'm Lisa Hayward with the University of Washington Edge Center, and this recording is going to provide the first of a three-part series on science communication. So bear with me. Here we go. The goal for today is to achieve simplicity in our communication. And if we can do that, we can better reach practitioners, community members, policymakers, educators, whole range of people outside of our technical discipline. I'm going to give you a tool to help you do this today, but before I do that, I'm going to tell a little story. So this takes place in the first part of the last century. There's a guy, 29 years old, a newly elected representative in Britain. And one day he went to give a speech to his new colleagues. No notes. He gets up, he starts talking. Midway through his speech, he just goes blank. Totally blank. For 3 full minutes. His opponents are snickering. His supporters are looking at the ground, trying to distance themselves from the debacle. Finally, after 3 minutes, this guy goes back to his seat. He puts his head in his hands, and he feels convinced that his career is over. Sure enough, the next day, all the newspapers are full of news about this shipwreck. And quote a doctor, a famous doctor who had speculated he had early onset dementia. Everyone agreed this guy's career was over. Luckily, it was not, because that man was Winston Churchill. So 36 years later, he had his moment when he was a newly elected prime minister, and it was his job to convince the British public to confront the Nazis with military force. At the time, the popular sentiment was to negotiate a deal. But in 2 weeks, with 6 speeches, he turned that around and he changed the course of the war. And he even saved civilization as we know it, according to many. We might not think civilization is perfect, but definitely better than the Nazi regime. So what happened during those 36 years? How did he go from being the shipwreck to being the master orator that he later became? Well, he never gave a speech without notes ever again. And we have those notes, and we have the edits that he made on those notes. So he employed a lot of tactics. He was dogged in his pursuit of excellence as an orator. But one of the most important things that he did was that he replaced long words with short ones. And we can see him doing this systematically over and over in his speeches. He would replace the long word with a short one. The way he put it is that short words are best. And I like this. I think he put it very well. He also said that short words are the more ancient words and they resonate the most powerfully with us. The way I like to think about it is that the short words require the least amount of translation in our own minds. So they free up cognitive resources for us to focus on the message of the communication. What does this look like? So here's a sentence. Apparently, Winston Churchill one day was riding through London in a car with a military secretary. And at the time, German bombs were falling on London on a daily basis. All the British aircraft were in the air. Fighting had never been more intense. And Winston Churchill said to his secretary, "Give me a moment. I have never been more moved than I am right now." And then 5 minutes later, he turned to his secretary and said, "Will you write something down for me?" And he said, "Never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few." Very powerful, very famous, most famous sentence of World War II, and very moving. I find it very moving. So this, if you look at this from the perspective of number of syllables, you'll see that only 4 words in the sentence have more than 1 syllable. And those 4 words just have 2 syllables each. So this shows how much power and impact a sentence can have, even with the smallest of words. Winston Churchill was a master. So let's step back and contrast that to the style of communication that we learn in our graduate programs. So here's a very problematic schematic. I'm not going to talk about its limitations. I'm just going to use it as a representation of the concept that I want to focus on. So I'm going to ask you to imagine a circle or a sphere, because I like the sphere better. And imagine a little core piece of that sphere in the very center. That's what we learn in elementary school. And then as we get to high school, we add another layer. When we get to college, we're adding yet another level still. And we're starting to develop a little protrusion. That's our specialty. That's what we major in. We get a master's, we build on that. And then if we get a PhD, we go way out to the outer extreme of human knowledge. We work for years, and the most we can hope to achieve is maybe a little pimple, expanding on what we know, going from the known to the unknown, and changing how we view the world. That's our PhD. That's that interface between the known and the unknown. And that's where all our focus goes through the course of our training. And so at some point, you have to step way back and find that area of commonality with people outside your field if you're going to explain to them what it is you do, why it is that what you do is important, why they should care, maybe why they should fund it. So that should be easy, right? Because we all remember being in elementary school. We all remember being in junior high. We have that experience in common with other people. But it's not easy because it's at odds with the style of communication that we learn through our academic training. So this is communicating with our academic peers. And what we need to do in this context, in our technical field, is to be accurate above all else and to be efficient because we have a lot of detail to convey to our peers. So if we want to be both accurate and efficient, like our papers need to include all the context for our results, the methodology needs to be so detailed that somebody could replicate it. Everything needs to be very dense. We need to use jargon, which is shorthand for complicated concepts that you don't want to write out every time. Statistics, graphs, caveats, all things that provide obstacles when we go to communicate with a more general audience. These are totally appropriate. This is how science is done. This is how science is communicated. We take years to learn these skills. I was a third-year graduate student before I could talk comfortably about what I did at a scientific conference. So that's all fine. We get training to do this implicitly. We learn it from our mentors, from our peers. We have to use it to write for publications in academic journals. We use it at conferences. We use it to get grants. After your years of training, you've gotten very good at this. And this is a very important skill. What you don't tend to get is training in communicating with a more general audience. And that's one reason that the Edge Center is sponsoring these science communication trainings right now. So I will point out before I move on that even within academic circles, there is an advantage in moving away from our specialized terminology. So if we can use less jargon, we can actually have more impact. We see higher number of citations, for example. We also see more interdisciplinarity because people outside our field are able to pick up our paper. It's more accessible to them because it doesn't have as much jargon and they could apply it to their own discipline potentially and come up with interdisciplinary connections. So let's look at the masters of oration and science communication. So I have the science communicators in green, and we can look at these in terms of grade level readability score. So this is a little bit counterintuitive because the lower the score here, the higher the readability. Grade level means the grade level for which the communication is appropriate. So we can see Hemingway here in one extreme, he is a 5.5. So he's writing for adults, but in a way that fifth graders can understand. Neil deGrasse Tyson is just a little bit higher grade level than that. I think he's at 5.7, something in that range for his Rice address. You probably know of him. He's just a masterful science communicator, astrophysicist. JFK, his moonshot speech rallied a lot of support for STEM. It was considered one of the most influential speeches of the 20th century. He was talking just about the 6th grade level in that speech. Robert Sapolsky, I love. He's written a ton of books for a public audience. He's a neuroscientist. So it's interesting because his TED Talk here is one example of his communication style. He's at a 7th grade level. Whereas if you look at his scientific papers for academic journals, he's way up there at a 16. That's well above postgraduate level. Very dense talk, very dense papers. Rachel Ball Kimmerer wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. If you haven't read it, you should. Probably many of you have. It's profound, moving, informative. I love that book. I just took an excerpt here to get a readability score. And she's about the same as Sapolsky, just about a 7. Churchill's Finest Hour. This was given right after France had fallen. It was a critical point in the war. He gave it, and it was just above an 8th grade level. Catherine Hayhoe, national treasure for her climate communication work, one of Time's most influential people. She gave a TED Talk at an 8th grade level. And then MLK is about an 8th grade level for his I Have a Dream speech. So you can see these powerful orators, these talented science communicators, they're all communicating in more or less a middle school level. How do we do this ourselves? How do we get there? Well, here's a tool I find really valuable. This is the Flesch Kincaid readability tool. So this can be accessed in Word. You can enable it and find a score in your spell check box down at the bottom. It's different from PC to Mac. It's different from version to version. So I actually just use a website that I give my students, and that way it's the same for everybody. You just paste some text and it gives you your readability scores. Regardless of what you do to get there, it's using the math that I've shown here. It's basically words per sentence, syllables per word. So if you're talking about readability, the holy grail is the short sentence, short word. We can focus on that. A lot of people worry, a lot of scientists worry, isn't it going to be dumbing down my work to get it to a middle school level? I have complicated concepts to convey. How am I going to put them into language that's accessible for a middle schooler? It's an art. It's difficult. It takes practice, just like our scientific communication, the way we learned it in graduate school. But it's nice to think about it as smartening up, as sophistication, as something that you can master. Because the thing that's dumb, I like how Susan Joy Hassel puts this, is speaking to people in a language that they don't understand. This is really common. We've seen this a lot, all of us, I'm sure. And it's painful. It's painful for me to see this. I really hope we can move away from it. And I think that we are in general. So how do we do this? I have an exercise that'll give you some practice in using this tool. So I'm going to ask right now, but in a little while, I'm going to ask you to go get an abstract that you've written. It could be for a journal, it could be for a grant proposal, it could be for a conference presentation, something that you've written for an academic audience. And then, or if you don't have something you've written yourself, something that somebody else has written for an academic audience, something you can take from a paper, for example. And then you're going to use Word, or you're going to use a website to bring that grade level, to measure that grade level. And then you've got your score. And then you're going to ask yourself, which audience do I want to reach that's outside of my technical discipline? So I'm writing this, I've got a 14.7 here. That's fine for the technical audience that I was trying to reach. Remember, Sapolsky was at a 16 when he was writing his academic papers. That's fine. Sentences themselves, I have the first 2 sentences of an abstract here that got published years ago. Not okay. They obscure the main point of my paper, which is not how you want to start out. But the score is fine. So You have this abstract, you have the grade level score, you have an audience, and you're going to get started simplifying this, increasing the readability by decreasing the size of the words, decreasing the length of the sentences. And we're going to take a first pass. So what does that look like? Well, you can find the clunky words, you can find clunky phrases. So has a proclivity for, has high proximity to, has the ability to compensate for perturbations. And we can find a more simple way to say these things. Likes, is near, can get used to noise, noise being a perturbation in this case. Easy, right? Winston Churchill would love this. No, it's not easy. So proclivity for, in the context which I'm using it in my field, it doesn't imply subjectivity. It doesn't imply anything about the internal state of the subject. Whereas likes does. Likes could run you the risk of being anthropomorphizing. However, I'm going to ask myself the goal. I'm going to ask myself the audience, the main message that I want to convey. And in this case, I can accept that likes is just shorthand for the concept that I want to convey. For this audience, for the forest service managers, it's not going to run me into trouble with anthropomorphizing. Is near is fine, can get used to noise. I don't like that one either. That one's problematic because there's a whole suite of physiological reactions that are implied by compensate when you're in my field that are not implied by getting used to something. I can accept that. I can take a hit to my accuracy because I have a different objective in this context. I'm trying to communicate in a way that's accessible. And this is a trade-off everyone's going to have to figure out on their own because everybody's going to feel discomfort in similar ways to what I've outlined here. And everybody's going to have to make the decision on how to articulate the concepts that they want to convey. So now I've done a pass. I've tried to simplify my language, use the short words where I can, shorten my sentences. I'm down to a grade level. Oh no, wait, I'm up to a grade level of 15. So that's rough because I'm trying to get it down. This I see all the time. I don't know why it happens, but it's very common with my students. So if you see it happen, if your score goes up, don't get discouraged, just press on, we'll get there. Next up, I can look for these long sentences. So I focused before on the long words. Remember, there's the two-pronged approach. Long sentences and long words should both get replaced. Here it says, what we found was that short-term motorcycle exposure increased stress steroids in male owls, and that long-term traffic exposure was closely tied to lower numbers of baby owls reaching independence. 32 words. Can we break that up? Yes, we can. And we can find phrases that have extra words like, what we found was that. We just need to say we found that. That's much better, much more succinct. I've been doing science writing and science communication for a long time. And I still always find phrases with extra words. And every time I can cut out those extra words, it's very satisfying. It's fun for me. Okay, so now we found that short-term motorcycle exposure increased stress in male owls. We also found that fewer baby owls fledged on sites near high traffic. So I've reduced the total number of words. I've gone from a 32 length word sentence to 12 and 13 word sentences. I've done things like increase stress instead of stress steroids, which is actually instead of stress steroid metabolites, which would be the more accurate way to say this. So this is very cringy for a stress physiologist to just say stress in male owls, but I've made that decision in the interest of being more accessible in my communication and conveying what is really the main message for my target audience, forest service managers. So pressing on, I'm doing this 6 attempts more until I get down to a grade level of 8, and I wanted to get 8 or lower. Although actually lower than a middle school level would be really weird unless you're Hemingway or Neil deGrasse Tyson. Keep that in mind. What I have now feels appropriate for Forest Service managers and feels accurate enough in terms of how I'm representing my results. So this feels good to me. Now I'm going to ask that you get out that abstract, go find it if you haven't already, and paste it into Word if it's not already into Word. So you're going to give it a score, a readability score in terms of grade level, paste that below your abstract, and then do a pass. Once you've done a pass, paste that again below, or paste it below and then do your pass. Whatever's easier. And then do that again. So you've gotten a second score. Mine was the 15. And then you've iterated and iterated till you're down to that grade level that you want, something 8th grade level or lower. And then I'm gonna ask you to stop this recording while you do that, and then come back and we'll discuss limitations. So pause the recording here. Good luck. And I'll see you in a little bit for the limitations. Okay, welcome back. So, like every tool, the Flesch Kincaid tool is imperfect. In some of the ways, some of the shortfalls are that it struggles with long words that don't actually decrease your readability. Like community, it's not a hard word for most audiences out there, but it is a long word, and so it will increase the grade level of your abstract or your presentation. I tend to use this word all the time. Any workaround that I could find for it would just be much more awkward, would ultimately decrease my readability. So I just accept that using that word might increase the grade level of my communication. I'm okay with that. Individual, hypothesis, unexpected. There's a whole list of these words where you don't really want to work around them because you'll end up being confusing. You just accept them. You just accept the lower readability of you're measuring it. On the flip side, there are short words that can introduce confusion. Jargon, acronyms particularly, might show up as short words and not get flagged by your Flesch Kincaid tool, whereas they're very much decreasing the readability of your communication. There are also words that have different meanings in different contexts. So what do I mean by that? This is Susan Joy Hassel's work again. So you can see that a small word like sign, for a more general audience, that might mean ethics, indication or astrological sign. But the better choice, according to Susan Joy Hassel, is to say a plus or minus sign. That's usually what's being discussed in this context of climate communication. So these words are going to be specific to climate communication. Your own field will have its own set of words. In every discipline, there's probably the words that are used one way with academic peers and a different way with the general public. So just be aware whether you're using those or not. And then finally, I'm going to end on this funny bit of research. So I was curious, I suspected that using more accessible language would increase the success rate of grant applications. I did a little search of the literature. I didn't find very much, but I did find this paper showing exactly the opposite. So the papers that had more technical language, longer sentences, more convoluted sentence structure, those were the papers more likely to have success in grant applications. And in my in-person training, there was quite a bit of speculation as to why this might be. I won't get into it. I'll just let you speculate on your own. But that is what I have for today. So if you want further resources, or if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm Lisa Hayward, and I'm at lhayward@uw.edu. Thank you.